Hey everyone. Before we get into today's episode, I'd really like to tell you about one of my favorite new podcasts. It's called Short Pour. Now, don't worry, this is not a paid endorsement. I really like these guys. It's a unique comedy podcast with these two brothers who drink beer. And I know, brothers drinking beer, that's really not unique. But in each episode, they explore a random topic that is somehow related to the beer they're sampling and reviewing. Sometimes they discuss history, origin stories, debate hypothetical tournaments and the rankings, or even reminisce about stories from their childhood. I'll drop a link in the show notes. Go on and give them a listen. And now, on to our episode. This week's podcast starts with a scene that's all too familiar for most of us. So picture this. It's 9:45 a.m. You've been sitting in the DMV waiting room for over an hour. You're holding ticket number B207, and the sign still reads B12. The fluorescent lights flicker, the uncomfortable plastic chair creaks underneath you, and the smell of stale coffee and despair fills the air. Finally, your number is called. You approach the counter, hopeful that your morning ordeal is nearly over, only to find yourself face to face with a stack of forms thicker than your last novel. You sigh. Welcome to the world of red tape. Welcome back to Lexicon, the podcast that slices through the bureaucratic jungle of words and phrases. I'm your host, TJ, and today we're diving deep into a term that symbolizes frustration, inefficiency, and paperwork-induced nightmares: red tape. Now, in the modern era, the phrase red tape has become deeply symbolic, used frequently in political speeches and commentary to critique the unnecessary and obstructive bureaucracy. Politicians from Ronald Reagan to Margaret Thatcher famously promised to cut red tape, to energize economies, and streamline government. And I'm sure we've all seen some politicians dramatically wielding giant scissors in their speeches promising to snip away at those bureaucratic barriers. Yet somehow, that tape keeps getting thicker. So where does that phrase come from? Well, red tape originated in 16th century Europe, specifically with the bureaucratic heart of the Holy Roman Empire, and later the British government. This wasn't a euphemism. Officials actually used red tape or ribbon to bind important legal and administrative documents. This would distinguish them from less critical papers, which would usually have been bound or secured with different colors of string. Now, the earliest literal use of red tape can be traced to the Spanish king Charles V, who in the early 1500s became the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, under his order, the empire began to practice binding important state documents in these red ribbons or red tape. This effort was designed to help modernize the administrative process of overseeing a vast empire that covered most of Central Europe. This probably made sense considering there was no email or even a telegraph at the time, and the Holy Roman Empire was in the midst of a religious uprising from that pesky Martin Luther and his Protestant Reformation. Then by the 17th and 18th centuries, British administrative offices had widely adopted this practice, solidifying the association of red ribbon with governmental authority, and soon, governmental excess. Because by the early 19th century, people weren't just irritated by red tape, they were officially complaining about it. In the 1830s, Age magazine, which was a British weekly at the time, they began frequently referring to the red tape school of politicians as an example of those politicians who seek to cling to power by any means necessary. Now, obviously that was just a 19th century-ism because we don't have those types of politicians anymore.
Bazinga!
But some years later, Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle lamented the red tapeism clogging British administration. And around the same time, Union soldiers of the American Civil War were growing frustrated by the amount of literal red tape they had to cut just to access their own records. And probably for good reason. The instructions for record keeping for the War Department in 1876 required that, whenever a case requiring action extends through several papers, the papers should, with the air of an elastic band or office tape, red tape, be always so arranged by the clerks. And, according to War Department records, the Union forces alone purchased 154 miles of red tape in 1864. Perhaps that was the start of the American dominance in defense spending. In modern times, Several countries have formalized their efforts and passed laws to try and reduce bureaucratic complexity through specific legislation. Canada has the Red Tape Reduction Act that was passed in 2015, mandating annual reports on efforts to reduce unnecessary regulations. Think about that. Annual reports on efforts to reduce unnecessary regulations. Essentially, they require even more paperwork to report less paperwork. In the UK, they've implemented numerous initiatives, notably the Red Tape Challenge, which was launched in 2011. This is a challenge that dared officials to untangle bureaucratic knots. Spoiler, the bureaucracy remains undefeated. And in the US, there have been several orders and acts that have been designed to cut through regulation, notably during the Reagan, Clinton, and Trump administrations. But if you filed taxes recently, you probably know how well that's worked out. And let's not leave out Australia. Australia passed the Cutting Red Tape Initiative back in 2013, which aimed to simplify and reduce regulations across all sectors, but mainly gave officials more things to document. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Reducing red tape is a good thing. And yes, I agree with you. But keep in mind, these legislative and policy efforts, most of which are from within the last 10 to 15 years, are in response to an administrative practice that has been around for more than 500 years. It's the government equivalent of glitter. You're never going to fully get rid of it. So there you have it, friends. Red tape, a phrase born of the bureaucratic ambitions and modernization, has now become the symbol of inefficiency, which, in the words of Alanis Morissette, is pretty ironic. So the next time you're stuck filling out redundant paperwork, take comfort in knowing that you're part of a centuries-old tradition of administrative chaos. And that's where we'll leave today. Thanks for tuning into Lexicon. Remember, if life's paperwork seems overwhelming, sometimes the only solution is to cut straight through the red tape, literally and metaphorically. Sorry, I couldn't resist trying to tie it all together. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your support helps keep Lexicon unraveling those word histories week after week. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and try to stay out of trouble. As always, Lexicon is written, recorded, and produced by me, your Logophile companion, TJ Martin. Thanks for listening.